Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 15, Part 2.
Okay, about 20 to 25 structures in total. Looks like a lot of houses, a store, a rail depot with no rails, and a large power substation. It looks to be in very good condition, no scrap buildings or other signs of modification.
Dusty squinted through his own binoculars as he took in my report. And the ponies?
Still haven't moved,
I said. The figure stood by the buildings a few miles away, too far me to make out details even with my binoculars, especially with the dim morning light struggling to pierce the cloud cover.
I count at least 15 scattered around in loose gatherings, but they're not really doing anything.
I lowered my binoculars.
I think they're fake.
Starlight peered down her scope, her lancer resting across the side of the wagon.
Could be military robots just standing guard? Possible,
I said, and I scanned across the town again.
I'm not aware of any pony form robots, but that wouldn't prelude some experimental line development in secret.
I swept my view over, out of town. A ring of dark tracks surrounded the strip of buildings, built on either side of a paved road. The road ended at the edge of town. A single dirt road met it, stretching off in the distance alongside a set of power lines. Other than that one line, the tight cluster of buildings stood isolated, like an island in the middle of an ocean. I focused again on a lone sign at the edge of town, the letters just barely too small to read at that distance. It had been about 24 hours since we passed the fence on the edge of the Pale Sand spell range, and that tiny, lonely town was the first indication that we had seen that ponies had ever been there.
So...
Starlight glanced over to Dusty, and then me.
should we check it out?
Could be dangerous, Dusty said. We've already got a goal. I'd rather not take risky side trips.
Pussy.
Sickle growled.
Look at the size of that power station.
Starlight said.
I've seen factories with smaller stations. What does a little town like that need with so much power?
She paused, thinking.
Could be a stable, actually. Stables have their own power source,
I said, focusing on the substation.
Still, that is a big substation. There could be something, and I don't think it would hurt to look a bit closer, get a better idea of what that place is, because the only thing I can tell from here is that it's not just a normal little village.
Dusty thought a moment before shrugging. If you don't mind the delay, sure. There's a small rise just to the right, probably half a mile out from town. We'll glass it from there, see how it looks. Unless we see something juicy, I'd recommend steering clear. This has all sorts of wrong written all over it. Sickle grumbled something under her breath, no doubt complaining once again about our cautiousness, but continued all on the same. We were about halfway to the rise when I could finally read the sign, despite the jostling of the wagon. I read it out loud.
Welcome to Ponytown. Population 98. Just a random town of 98 out in the middle of the desert?
Starlight said.
With the rail station that has no rails,
I added. I could see that the structures had once been garishly painted, much like the welcome sign, though the years had faded the colors badly. The pony-shaped figures gathered around outside them, remaining unmoved. Between the buildings, I could see glimpses of multiple skywagons along the street, and even a few motor wagons as well. Their bright paint had held up better than that of the buildings. It wasn't long before we reached the small rise Dusty had indicated. I gave one final scan to confirm what I had seen before, lowering my binoculars.
They're not robots, they're mannequins. They've probably been there since the war.
Starlight cast a glance my way before peering down her scope again.
Why would any pony build a town in the middle of a desert and stick a bunch of... It's a test site,
I said, and she glanced at me again.
A test site? What would they test?
She abruptly halted, blanching, and finally returned to her scope.
Well, that's...
We both looked over the array of figures we could see. The fancy, upscale but faded houses had many a pony figures visible. The nearest group, gathered in a backyard with a very out-of-place picket fence, looked like a large family, including a few colts and fillies. And almost all the adults wore clothes of varying types, mostly reduced to tatters by the years of weather. The foals were posed as if playing, forever frozen in place.
Extremely creepy,
Starlight finished. So, no secret military lab or valuable loot? Dusty noted.
No secret military lab.
I agreed, but then continued on.
Possibly loot, though. I saw a film about their megaspell testing, something the Ministry of Image put together to reassure the public. So, they made the test villages as close to life as possible, stocked up with food and all. There should be everything you'd expect in a real town, and I don't see any signs of looting.
Starlight murmured quietly as she slowly panned her scope around the place.
Doesn't look like any ponies touched it since the war.
I nodded, then raised a hoof to point.
But what's really got my attention are those motor wagons. They look to be in good condition, and there are several to salvage parts from.
Even Dusty's ears perked up at that, and he spent some time gazing through his binoculars at them. Would certainly be convenient, he finally said, then nodded. Okay. Leave the wagon here, and we'll check it out. Just keep an eye out. There's gotta be some reason this place hadn't been hit for salvage, and I doubt that reason is rumors or the remote location. Sickle unhitched herself, followed after Dusty. As for myself, I decided to err on the side of caution. I flashed over in green fire as I expended some of the love Starlight had shared with me to retake my Whisper Wind's disguise, and quickly followed along with the others. While we had no idea what was waiting for us in that town, I didn't want to take any chances of being discovered. And besides, I find handling and aiming a weapon to be easier when it's held in my teeth rather than floating freely beside me. And fangs get in the way of that. Not that I'm a great shot to begin with, but I could use every advantage I could get. We made it to the edge of the little town without incident. Our path leading us past the group of mannequins we had been eyeing before, gathered together as if enjoying a backyard picnic. Faded and decayed clothes rustled faintly in the breeze, while the fake ponies on display held eternal smiles, oblivious of the fate that had been intended for them. Our destination was one of the motor wagons, painted in a cherry red that was only moderately faded and pitted with time. It was parked under an awning on a small strip of concrete beside the fake family's house. Dusty moved by it, sweeping his weapon around to cover corners as he passed them, until he could scan around the street in front of the house. Sickle followed behind him, but had slowed it notably. Her head twitched this way and that as she looked around, and she growled quietly.
I don't like it. Something ain't right with this shit.
Starlight moved up to the side window of the house and peered through, first over the sights of a repeater, then leaned in for a closer look. A moment later, she gave a low whistle.
That is the most thoroughly stocked kitchen I've ever seen in my entire life.
Through the window, I could see that the inside of the houses had endured much better than the outside. It looked like a cushy and lavishly stocked suburban home. The colors had remained more vivid in the shade of the interior, with their cheerfulness diminished only slightly by the thick coating of dust over everything. Beyond the kitchen, I could see a table with several mannequins sitting around it, posed as if sharing a family meal. Check the motor wagon, Dusty said, crouching at the front of the vehicle. See if it runs, or if we can fix it up.
On it.
Starlight said, holstering her repeater again as she scrambled up onto the driver's position. I'd moved up near Dusty until he told me to watch out for the rear. I followed his directions, moving to the rear of the motor wagon and watching the back sides of the neighboring buildings. Sickle remained near him, her tail flicking in agitation as she muttered.
Something's seriously fucked here. Well, the motor wagon doesn't start,
Starlight said.
Might be out of charge, or something might have come loose. Let me see.
She climbed over the top of the vehicle to the motor, and as much as I wanted to watch her work, I kept my eyes out for danger. It was just moments later that we heard the sound. Low and distant. I had previously described the sound of a minigun firing at us as the most terrifying sound I've ever heard, and while I would still consider that to be true, I would point out that there are different kinds of terror. That had been the visceral terror of overwhelming power and impending death tearing through the air around me. This was different. This low sound was almost inaudible at first, as it filtered across the distance to us, but it grew, steadily. Almost impossibly, in both pitch and volume. The banshee wail of the air raid siren echoed across the basin, a creeping terror that conjured up the worst nightmares of your own imagination. The hairs of my disguised form stood on end. Well, that isn't good, Dusty muttered before speaking up. Stay alert. Starlight, help. Shit! My head snapped around to see Dusty rise and take a step back, bringing his rifle up. A pure white earth pony had stepped out from the house across the street, staring at us. I immediately realized that something was wrong with this pony. I paid a lot of attention to the fine details of appearance, and my eyes went straight towards the oddities. It wasn't just her coat that was white. What flesh I could see was almost entirely devoid of color, with only the faintest suggestion of pink. Her eyes were pink. I recognized the signs of albinism, but the oddities didn't stop there. Her eyes were fully dilated, and even as she stared at us, they seemed unfocused. While her coat was perfect, her pale pink mane and tail were thin and limp. She'd come to a halt and wavered, as I'd expect of a pony abruptly coming to face with a rifle-armed soldier, but I could see no sign of fear, or even comprehension. Those pink eyes narrowed, her scraggly mane and tail flicked about as if caught in some unfelt breeze. She then opened her mouth, and she let out an unearthly shriek of rage. Her mane and tail burst into flame, and she charged. She only made it to the edge of the street when Dusty's rifle hammered twice at my ears. At least one bullet, if not both, found their mark, and the pony tumbled to the ground. She squirmed about for a moment until a third bullet took off part of her head, and the flames flickered out.
What the fuck?
Sickle bellowed. Past the echoing sound of Dusty's gunshots, I could hear more shrieks. Dusty shouted back to us. "Whisper, get airborne! See what's coming down on us! Stark, get—" I missed the rest of what he said as I transformed. Rather than discard my disguise, I hastily added a pair of wings to my current form, threw back my cloak, and launched myself up into the air. It's amazing just how much your perception can change with just a little bit of elevation. From just above the rooftop, I could see the whole settlement. Several more white ponies were emerging from various buildings, with the same flaming albino look as the first. None carried arms or armor, and I figured Sickle could likely take them all on herself. My elevated point of view also changed my perception of the area around the town. That little bit of height was enough for all the scrub and subtle rolling of the terrain to fall beneath me, giving me a clear view of the basin in every direction. Without those in the way, I could see the distant white forms milling about roughly a mile past the town. I raised my binoculars to quickly scope out the distant forms, in case they should pose some risk to us. There were dozens of them, milling about in agitation around an open girder tower, maybe 100 feet tall. For a moment, I thought it might have been an antenna, only without any lines attached to it. And then I thought it might be a water tower with an unusually narrow tank. Then I caught the faint sickly colors that slowly twisted and churned within the upper confines of the tower. My stomach dropped, a chill flooding through my veins. I landed heavily atop the motor wagon, making Starlight jump in surprise.
Run!
Dusty didn't question me as he drew back. Move! Now, go!
Oh, for fuck's sake!
Sickle growled, throwing a pill bottle back into her saddlebag.
Damn it!
Starlight snapped as she hopped down, trotting towards the rear of the vehicle.
I can fix it! I can fix it!
Go! Dusty repeated, breaking into a trot.
Run! Run!
I shouted as I galloped past them, only slowing to shout back.
The mega spell they were going to test, it's still here! Oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me!
Sickle growled as she broke out into a full gallop. While her loping pace looked slow and heavy, her huge stride ate up the distance. The others cursed and followed her, fleeing that little town, and I soon had to take flight to keep up, even with Starlight and Dusty pausing in to turn and shoot at the ponies who gave chase. Past the clanking and crashing of Sickle's armor, the echoing air raid siren slowly wound down to silence, but we kept going. I skimmed the ground, staying low and agonizingly slow as I kept pace with the others, despite how much I wanted to flee as fast as possible. By the time we headed over to the wagon, the albino ponies had stopped chasing us. Sickle was slowing down, panting hard, and both Dusty and Starlight were looking winded. Dusty called out, "Sickle, grab the wagon!"
Fuck the wagon!
Sickle shouted back, running right past it. Dusty swore and turned, galloping over to the wagon and quickly strapping himself in. "Whisper!" he called out, and I darted over to hover beside him. "How big of a blast do those things make? How far away do we need to get?" He was already pulling the wagon along before I could answer, quickly reaching a rapid trot, and I flew along beside him.
Well, it depends on the design of the mega spell. I only know vague generalizations, not firm.
"That'll do!"
The rough estimates I heard for city-killing balefire megaspells were only 1 mile for near total destruction and death, 2 miles for serious destruction and casualties, and 4 miles for minor damage and injury.
Shit! He urged himself onward, picking up the pace. I looped back and pushed against the back of the wagon to help. I had wing power just going to waste, after all.
If you see a flash, hit the dirt and cover up,
I called out.
The mega spell was a mile past the town. This far out, we might avoid serious injury if we're not directly exposed.
We continued on, though our pace was rapidly flagging. We made it barely a mile from town before exhaustion started to really kick in from our rapid retreat. Sickle had started to trail behind Starlight, while Dusty and I took up the rear. Starlight paused at a dry steam bed for us to catch up. Sickle simply collapsed inside the shallow ravine, and Dusty and I soon followed.
Catch your breath! Catch your breath!
Dusty said, panting.
60 seconds, and then we're moving out at a trot.
There were a few weak rumbles, but we all wanted to get as far away from the mega spell as possible. Sickle dug out an inhaler and practically tore off her muzzle before taking a hit. The effect was immediate, and while she was still panting hard, she went from slack and exhausted to tense and ready to go. Then the pill bottle came out again and she downed a pair of tablets. By the time everyone else was getting up again, she had pulled out a second inhaler, took another draw, and threw it away.
Okay, let's fucking do this already.
Dusty went back to the wagon, but Sickle shoved him right to the ground, snarling.
Give me that, you pussy-ass bitch!
As Dusty picked himself up again, Sickle quickly threw on the harness and muscled the wagon across the stream bed, nearly tipping it over in the process. Her helmet's muzzle, still open, bounced and slapped against the side of her head. I trotted alongside Dusty and Starlight, and Sickle broke out into a full-speed, lopping gallop.
Slow down!
Dusty shouted out.
Fuck you!
Sickle shouted back.
Get your weak ass in the cart if you can't fucking keep up!
We broke out into weary gallops as well in an attempt to catch up, but Sickle didn't slow down for us to catch up. In annoyance, I took the air again, looping my forelegs around Starlight's chest, much to her surprise, and ferrying her to the wagon. I returned to do the same for Dusty, depositing him beside Starlight, and then landed beside both of them. I figured if Sickle was going to be that way, she could carry me too. As it was, I had to clutch the side of the wagon to keep from bouncing out as Sickle galloped along much more quickly than the wagon or its occupants were happy with. Starlight laid on her side in a bouncing wagon, panting.
Okay, Pegasus Whisper is handy. Flying has its advantages.
I agreed, while seriously considering taking to the air and flying along beside the wagon just to be spared the rough ride.
Feathers suck, though.
She gave a weak chuckle, then groaned.
I fucking hate ferals. And what the heck was with them anyway?
Hell if I know,
Dusty replied, holding onto the edge of the wagon as he watched behind us.
They sure acted like ghouls, but I've never seen ones like those.
Wait,
I said, spreading my wings for balance.
ferals? Ghouls?
Starlight propped herself up against a row of ammunition cases.
Yeah, you know...
She stopped and blinked.
Right, you don't know. Of course.
She looked over to Dusty.
Hell, I don't even know where to start.
Dusty looked over for her.
Ghouls are ponies that died and came back to life because of magical radiation,
He said.
Some keep their minds, ferals are the ones who didn't. They're more like animals than ponies now.
I stared at him in disbelief.
Died, and
It suddenly clicked.
Balefire's necromantic in origin. Huh. That always conjured up images of zombie ponies, but I never imagined that would actually happen.
Dusty gave a weak snort of laughter.
Yeah, don't call a ghoul that. Never seen one who liked that name.
Really?
I asked, finding the peculiar pedantry even more bizarre than the idea of Balefire animated undead.
Of the two, Ghoul is the less offensive one?
Hey, I didn't make the rules,
Dusty said.
Though, fair warning, most ghouls look pretty badly decayed. Like, they rotted for a few days before coming back. Those ones back there were weird. I've heard of a few different kinds of ghouls before, but never ones like those.
Why the difference?
Dusty shrugged.
Hell if I know.
The wagon bounced clear of the grounds, eliciting a yelp from Starlight. I caught air, beating my wings a couple of times before landing atop it once more. Dusty turned and yelled.
Damn it, Sickle, slow down! You're gonna break a wheel at this rate!
Sickle's only reply was the growling tone her panting took on. Dusty muttered, turning around to look back. I continued to watch Sickle. The plates on her back shifted and clanked with every stride, like an old rickety yet powerful machine. We hit another bump, jostling us all around, and I ended up sprawling against Starlight, who spent the next few moments cursing at Sickle. I sat up, clutching to the side of the wagon once more.
She's gonna slow down sooner or later. Sure,
Starlight said, shoving away a small heap of guns that slid up against her.
I give her a couple more minutes before the drugs wear off and she just passes out and eats dirt.
I settled in again as best as I could with unsecured cargo randomly assaulting me. Eventually, I looked back. Dusty was looking behind us with the binoculars. His ears had perked up alertly but then drooped down, and he lowered his binoculars, continuing to stare off into space.
What's wrong?
I asked, and he turned to me, his expression hardening in an instant. You, too, are cursed, aren't you? He looked to Starlight. Like, literally cursed. That's what this is, isn't it? Starlight frowns.
What the heck are you talking about, Dusty?
I'm talking about running into some weird new pyrotechnic ghouls, getting chased off by a megaspell of all things. He pointed a hoof back towards the horizon. And now your damn alicorn friend is back. Starlight sat bolt upright, despite the shaking of the wagon, and I balanced with my wings as I raised my own binoculars. Searching in the direction Dusty had pointed, the jostling made it difficult, but I soon caught a few shaky glimpses of a purple form banking slowly around. She was circling the town we had just left. Searching. I lowered my binoculars.
Okay. Running into her at Paradise Beach could have been a coincidence. Showing up here now? Yeah, that's suspicious.
Damn right it's suspicious, Dusty said. What the hell did you two do?
Hey!
Starlight shouted, bracing as the wagon lurched again.
We didn't do anything.
Then why the hell is it following us?
Well, I don't know. I don't know, Dusty. What are you...
It was at that moment that Starlight's earlier prediction came true. I wasn't looking in Sickle's direction, so I didn't see if she wavered, sagged, or gave any other sign of exhaustion before simply collapsing. My first knowledge of the event came when the wagon abruptly and violently upended, hurtling me into the air. I tumbled, only barely able to reorient myself with the clumsy Pegasus wings in time to save myself from impacting to the ground. Momentum had done the rest as it sent the cart tumbling, throwing its contents across the ground. Unfortunately, those contents were Dusty, Starlight, and several hundred pounds of unsecured equipment. The crash was already over by the time I had gotten under control. A few boxes were still tumbling along the ground amidst a cloud of dust, and Starlight and Dusty both groaned, until Starlight moved and the groan turned into a sharp yell of pain. I darted over, landing beside her as she rolled onto her back, cradling a foreleg against her chest. She grit her teeth against the pain, hissing and grunting.
Starlight?
I said, her eyes opening to a sliver at the sound of her name.
Are you okay? Starlight.
She grimaced, closing her eyes again for a moment, and winced once more as she moved her leg. She practically growled past her clenched teeth.
I think it's broken. I think it's broken. Are you sure? Are you sure?
She hesitated, then lifted her leg a fraction of an inch. She immediately hissed in pain.
Yep.
She laid her leg down again, taking a couple deep breaths.
Oh yeah, pretty sure.
Dusty had gotten up by then and hobbled over on 3 legs. The fourth one was held to his side. He grunted as he sat beside her, then held out a hoof near hers. Let me see. Again she hesitated, then slowly moved her other leg away. Though he clearly was in pain himself, he carefully touched along the length of Starlight's leg, eliciting a hiss of pain each time. I stood back and watched, feeling useless. Yeah, Dusty said, sitting back and cradling his side again. Seems like a pretty clean break. Hey, Whisper. See if you can find where that medical kit went. Dig up a splint. Starlight cursed under her breath, frowning down at her leg. By the time I had found out where the medical supplies had ended up, and found a splint with a disorganized mess within, Dusty had gotten Starlight's saddlebags off and was digging out a healing potion. I handed over the splints, then sat beside Starlight and Dusty as he carefully lifted Starlight's leg. She grit her teeth, but bore the pain pretty well, and moments later she relaxed again as he set the limb down across the splint's bindings. I placed a hoof gently on her shoulder. She winced again as Dusty tightened the bindings, lashing the splint onto her leg, and as he did so, he spoke to me. Whisper.
What's that alicorn doing?
I twitched in alarm and quickly turned around, and I scanned along the horizon and the sky just above it, both by eye and with my binoculars.
I don't see her.
At least she isn't coming this way.
Dusty muttered as he continued to work. Tightening the last strap, he had Starlight lift her leg. She did so, and without any fresh shocks of pain. Satisfied, Dusty passed over the healing potion.
Drink this. Should heal the bone up, but might be a week for a while. Just keep the splint on and stay off that leg for now until...
I know.
She downed the healing potion in one quick gulp, then set the bottle down again.
Don't want to break it again while it's weak and all that.
Then, almost apologetically, she added,
Thanks. Thank you.
Dusty nodded. A silence grew between us until, several seconds later, Dusty finally spoke again.
I suppose we should check on Sickle.
Starlight answered with an unenthusiastic grunt as she stood up, balancing on 3 legs. I had offered a hoof to help her, but she was determined to do it on her own. Sickle lay where she had fallen, still harnessed to the wagon. The limp sprawl would have looked like she had simply dropped dead if not for her sides moving with her shallow, rapid breathing. A frothy spittle clung to her lips and chin, making her look more like a rabid beast. Her eyes were half open, staring vacantly from behind the slits of her helm. One of the wagon poles lay beneath her, broken from the crash. Dusty stared down at her for several seconds before looking up to us again.
And this, my little ponies, is why you don't abuse combat drugs.
One of Sickle's legs shifted a few inches, and she emitted a quiet string of mostly incoherent sounds. The only word I caught was cunt. Starlight snorted and walked past her, muttering.
Dumb bitch.
Sickle replied with another incoherent mumble. Sitting beside Sickle, Dusty placed a hoof atop her helmet.
You okay in there?
More mumbles. A foreleg dragged its way across the ground to her head, but lacked the strength to do any more.
You're lucky you didn't give yourself a heart attack or a stroke or something,
Dusty said, reaching over to Sickle's armored saddlebags. That finally provoked a bit more of a reaction from her as she twisted around, grabbing at his leg. He drew it back just in time, then scowled down at her.
Relax, I'm just getting a healing potion for you.
Fine.
She mumbled, slowly relaxing again. Her twisting around left her sprawled on her back and even more tangled up.
You just ran until the drugs couldn't keep you going,
Dusty said.
Last pony I saw do that blew up his heart.
Fuck that,
she said between pants, laying her head back until the helm's horn dug into the ground.
Expensive shit. I'm fine.
Dusty sighed, frowning down at her. A short distance away, Starlight was starting to gather our scattered supplies. She might have been down a hoof for the time being, but that didn't affect her magic. I helped her, gathered up scattered ammo cases, bundles of tarps, and guns. Dusty eventually fed Sickle one of his own healing potions to get around her protests, and she remained lying there for several minutes as we gathered things up. He coaxed her to get up so he could get her unstrapped from the wagon, though she wavered drunkenly as she did so. Once freed, she staggered off for a few more steps before sitting down heavily. Her head wavered from side to side as if unable to properly focus, and she soon gave up and flopped down onto her side once more. The wagon was salvageable. The back right wheel had broken off at the axle, and one of the 2 harness poles, I'm pretty sure it has a name, I simply haven't encountered it before, was broken in half. The other wheels were fine, and while Dusty said that the pivot point for the front wheels were bent, it was still functional. He reasoned that with a proper load balance and a bit of effort, the wagon should work. For now. The sound of Sickle's saddlebags opening drew our attention, and Dusty immediately dropped what he was doing and trotted up to her.
Oh no,
he said, a hoof reaching out to stop the pill bottle she just pulled out.
No more drugs. The last thing...
Sickle came to life. Her other leg lashed out, catching Dusty around the neck, and carried him in an arc over her prone form and into the ground beyond. She was instantly on top of him, spittle flying from her lips as she roared.
Listen here, you fucking shit stain!
Starlight and I both shouted our objections as we rushed over to help, but Sickle ignored us. She jammed a hoof in Dusty's face, leg blades hovering over his eyes.
You don't fucking tell me what I can't and can't do, bitch! You can ask, and if I...
She wobbled and then went completely limp, collapsing face first into the dirt and flopping onto her side. Dusty groaned, half beneath her.
Damn it, Sickle,
he grumbled, shoving at her side to little effect. We went to help roll her off of him, and a moment later she moved, her head rolling to the side, and suddenly exploding into motion again, her legs kicking out defensively as she let out an incoherent, babbling yell. Just as quickly as it came, she stopped, frozen in place, and panting. Inside of her helm, I could see the flickering reflection of her eyes blinking.
What? What?
I had to admire Dusty's patience and self-control. "Sickle?" he asked, reaching up to place a hoof on the side of her helm. She seemed to have trouble focusing on him, given the way her head continued to wobble and tilt, even with his assistance.
Dusty?
He nodded. "Do you remember where you are?"
I was... in a maze.
She slowly looked around, expression slack.
Where? In the desert.
She then focused on him again.
Where? Were we fucking?
Dusty gave a snort. No, we weren't. Now, could you get off of me?"
Yeah,
she said, rolling over to sprawl on her back once more. The lingering effects of her brief unconsciousness quickly faded, and when she lifted her head again, she didn't wobble any.
I was about to kick your ass, wasn't I?
Dusty rose to his hoofs again, once again holding one leg against his side. "You just passed out because the accelerants you were using wore off, and your body couldn't keep up with the strain. The healing potion will help with any muscle or circulatory damages it caused, but you should probably take it easy for a bit." She raised her forehooves to her face. I saw her bare her teeth for a moment, as if angry once more at being told what to do, but she soon relaxed.
A nap is sounding kinda good right now.
"Go ahead. Grab a spot in the wagon," Dusty said. We helped her into the wagon, getting her situated in the front left to counterbalance for the missing wheel. She flopped down limply, her head resting across the edge of the wagon. The rest of the wagon's contents were loaded around her, and Dusty took the time to get things tied down as best as he could, despite giving a wince of pain every time he twisted. Once everything was loaded, he walked over to the front of the cart, with a harness hanging from the single pole. "Well, this is gonna be a pain in the ass," he said, reaching for it.